suspicion to evidence-based oversight. And our aim is not to police the entire NPO ecosystem, but to target the small fraction of organizations that may be vulnerable to abuse, while supporting the overwhelming majority that operate with integrity and transparency. To build effective oversight, we must first understand the typology of NPOs in various ways. The first typology is diversion of funds, where legitimate donations are redirected for illicit use. The appropriate oversight response here involves robust, suspicious transaction reporting, close collaboration between FIUs and law enforcement, and stronger information. The second typology is exploitation of legitimacy, where seemingly credible organizations use their humanitarian image as cover for financing extremist activities. The oversight response in such cases should emphasize transparency, mandatory audits, and verification of implementing partners. Of course, this is where I know most NPOs and CSOs do not want to be brought to question. The third typology involves misuse in conflict zones, where aid organizations are coerced into paying illegal tolls or taxes to armed groups. This requires tailored risk mitigations guidance for high-risk areas developed jointly by regulators and humanitarian agencies. Now, with these realities in mind, what model of oversight best fits our African context? The evidence increasingly points to a hybrid, tri-sectoral model anchored in partnerships rather than punishment. Under this model, governments should focus regulatory energy on high-risk organizations identified through the National Risk Assessment and NPO Terrorism Financing Risk Assessment. These typically include NPOs operating in or near conflict zones, those managing complex cash flows, or those experiencing abrupt leadership changes. The risk matrix model used by the Charity Commission of England and Wales offers a practical example of proportionality in action that's applying minimal oversight to small local charities while imposing enhanced due diligence on large cross-border NPOs working in high-risk regions. Equally vital is self-regulation, which is one key pillar necessary to operationalize a risk-based approach. Initiatives such as the Dutch Roundtable on Financial Access for NPOs and the Tri-Sector Group, which I have already alluded, demonstrate how open dialogue can replace tension with trust. In Kenya, we are also advancing this model, as you heard our CSO representative this morning alluding to, where we ensure that the public benefit organization regulatory works in close consultation with the sector. We also work closely with the financial system and our national AML CFT working group agencies. Now, looking ahead, I propose 3 priorities for Africa's collective journey towards effective and balanced oversight. First, we should institutionalize consultative NPO risk assessments. Risk assessments conducted with the sector are far more accurate and sustainable than those conducted for or against it. NPOs should not merely be subjects of risk assessment, but in my view, they should be co-authors and participants of the same. Second, we ought to build a comprehensive, accurate, and accessible public registry of NPOs. These registries should contain governance and financial information, and where applicable, beneficial ownership data. Transparency builds both public trust and financial inclusion. In our authority, in our records, we've got registered more than 14,000 NPOs, but in our compliance register, we have only about 4,000. Where are the rest? About 8,000. That casts doubt on some activities and transparency level of NPOs and CSOs. Thirdly, our central banks and FIUs should issue clear guidance on banking de-risking. A true risk-based approach does not equate to zero tolerance. Financial institutions must distinguish between low and high-risk NPOs, clearly applying the simplified due diligence where appropriate and enhanced due diligence were justified, but not closing accounts as a default reaction. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, the measure of our success will not be in the number of regulations enacted or institutions monitored. It will be in the resilience and vitality of our civic space, in the speed with which humanitarian aid reaches flood victims, in the continuity of youth empowerment programs, in the voice of advocacy groups that hold power to account. As regulators, we carry dual responsibility: to protect the system from abuse and to protect the space for legitimate civil action. These are not competing goals. They are complementary pillars of good governance and inclusive security. Let us therefore approach this mission as partners in purpose, not as adversaries in compliance. Let us build an Africa where financial integrity and civil freedom reinforced, but not to undermine each other. In doing so, we safeguard not only our financial systems, but also the democratic heartbeat of our continent. Thank you for listening to me, and may God bless Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Laxmana. You set a very good tone for the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
May I ask you to take a seat, and may I ask the panelists to come to the floor. We have in the panel Stefano Keller from Uganda. We have Bernadette Nzomo from Kenya. We have Luga from Nigeria. Sarah Biret from Uganda. Ernest Niemai from Zimbabwe. And we have, let me go back to the list, from Botswana, Ms. Offense Goyaman and Mr. Otsile Litiro. Please, take your seats. Wherever you want. Good to see you. In the meantime, can we get this one removed as it obstacles the view? Welcome, panelists, and
Mom won't be coming from Botswana. She's not feeling well.
oh, who's coming from Botswana?
No, she won't be in the panel.
Okay, so we don't have Botswana in the panel.
No.
Okay, yeah. Apologies for Botswana this time. Let me introduce from the far right, Mr. Laxmana already is introduced. I do it very briefly, since we want to give a lot of time for interaction, also the Q&A. But I start with you. Let me see where you are on the list. Mr. Ernest Nyamai, excuse my pronunciation, from Zimbabwe, right? You're the Executive Director of the National Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, NANGO, the Zimbabwe's umbrella body for NGOs. Welcome. On his side, we have Dr. Sarah Birete, right, from Uganda. Dr. Birete is founding partner and Executive Director for Center for Constitutional Government, CCG, a Uganda constitutional watchdog, non-governmental organization based in Uganda. I presume in Kampala? That's right. Welcome. On your side, we have Madame Bernadette Nzomo from Kenya. She's the Manager, Research and Policy at the Public Benefit Organization Regulatory Authority, the organization of Dr. Laxmana. Welcome, Bernadette. Then we have Mustafa, and I rehearsed your name so many times, Mustafa, but it never comes out fluently like you do it. Mustafa Yakubu Luga from Nigeria. He's team lead in counter-financing of terrorism and analyst at the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. Welcome. And last but definitely not least here, we have Dr. Stephen Okello from Uganda. He's the Secretary of the National Bureau for NGOs in Uganda under the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the national authority mandated to regulate and oversee the NGO sector. So welcome to you, welcome to everyone. And I would like to pick further on one of the issues that you were mentioning in your speech. And you said very clearly that in one sentence, in essence, we must move from blanket suspicion to evidence-based oversight. Our aim is not to police the entire MPO ecosystem, but to target a small fraction of organizations that may be vulnerable to abuse while supporting the overwhelming majority that operate with integrity and transparency. Well, here's the big challenge. It sounds great, and it's a good plan, we should do it, but how are we going to do that? We have a lot of experience, and I would like to start to hear from each panelist. Just freely take some minutes to explain from your experience in your country, how is MPO regulation taking place today? Ems, can I start with you on your side?
Thank you very much, moderator, and good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, my name is Ernest Nyimai. I work for National Association of NGOs from Zimbabwe. I think I have three key takeaways from the remarks that we have received from...
Hold on, can I ask one question to the audio? We hear the sound only via the room, which is very difficult to hear each other on the stage. Can we get a little bit monitor sound? Please go on.
Okay, thank you. So I have three key takeaways that I think I picked from the keynote address that we received from our regulator, the Director General of PBO in Kenya. What I think was really underscored was the need for us to mitigate against the unintended consequences of implementing the FATF Recommendation 8. And it's something that is close to my heart as I relate with the experience that we have gone through as a country in Zimbabwe, where I think from his remarks and presentation, he emphasized on the need for the implementation of the Recommendation 8 to be focused, to be proportionate, and to be risk-based. And I think the experience that we have had as a country is that the government of Zimbabwe has proceeded to amend the law that governs and regulates NPO sector, called the Private Voluntary Organization Amendment Act, without carrying in NPO risk assessment, for instance. So what we then experienced was more or less an assumption that all NPOs in the country, they fall under the definition of FATF, and also all NPOs are at risk. So our argument, and we have been having a lot of engagements to try and negotiate for the application of the risk-based approach. So I think, and also if you look at the different elements and clauses of the Amendment Act itself, quite a number of clauses does not speak to Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 8 requirements or the desired outcome. So for us, it was more or less that the government has been trying to apply the recommendation, whilst the other preliminary processes that were supposed to be done before the amendments, that was not done properly. Of course, the law has been amended now. It's now an act, but I think there is now an opportunity, and we have also cultivated a culture of engagement and negotiation with the regulator to try and negotiate for its implementation and also for co-creation in terms of the actual regulations to accompany the Amendment Act. And the second reflection, I think, is around the need for us as the NPO sector to consider having self-governance models. And in the remarks, I think you mentioned the need for self-regulation. And what we have been going through as a country is that we believe that at the moment, the sector is not yet prepared in terms of the practice, especially with regards to accountability. And the work that we have been doing was around trying to make sure that at least we benchmark our practice and we try to have a standardized way of operating as a non-profit organization sector, such that at the end of the day we have a wide sector model that we use as of self-governance. We have borrowed a model that Uganda is using called the Quality Assurance and Accountability Certification Mechanism, QAM, which I believe from the work that we have done so far, I think we have really yielded some results in that regard. And lastly, the idea of ensuring that there is co-creation, co-designing, and collaboration. And for this, we have borrowed the initiative that Civic Advisory Hub has been selling of Talk to Your Regulator, which I believe in other jurisdictions, they call it tri-sector collaborations. So this has helped us to try and bring all other regulators that is an obligation in terms of ensuring that there is oversight over the operations of the non-profit organizations. And so far, what we have also realized as part of the achievements from this is that some of the regulators were not even aware of the requirements of the FATF Recommendation 8, yet they were advancing, initiatives. They were also coming to the sector with additional burdensome administrative requirements under the armpit of or under the disguise of complying with Recommendation 8, yet they were not even aware of what is compelled to be done in terms of the procedure and the process under the risk-based approach. So I think for me, those were the three top headline reflections that I got from the keynote address. Thank you. I do submit. Thank you.
Yeah, it works. Very good. Very insightful. Let's directly shift to Sarah. Can you put the spotlights on Uganda? Is your mic working? Or take your neighbor's mic, that's working very well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to our keynote speaker and our moderator for the session. My response is not very different from Zimbabwe to the keynote address. Very well presented by a keynote speaker. And my thoughts will also be around Recommendation 8, where the NPOs are no longer obligated entities. This has prompted some positive shifts in Uganda and in the civic space generally, with opportunities for reform. However, there are some challenges that have persisted, and these include over-regulation of the NGO sector. The sector remains with a burdensome regulatory framework, and I know our regulator is on the very panel, but some processes of renewing permits for NGOs have taken much longer than before. And in the sector, we are wondering what the problem is. I'm also aware that there were other legal reforms that affected the functioning of the NGO Bureau, but the process of, taking longer to renew NGO permits affects the whole working environment of NGOs, including inability to apply for proposals without a valid permit, and this has affected many governance NGOs in the country. There is also the security mindset of perception that governance and human rights relate honest conversations with a few implementations. We wish all the recommendations of these dialogues could be implemented by the government actors. NGOs were involved in the latest national risk assessment in Uganda, providing data to better inform how risk should be evaluated, and this is positive. Many CSOs have internal compliance systems to improve accountability, as highlighted by the keynote speaker. NPLs also work with the regional and international partners to bring Uganda's concerns on table, and this helps to secure a response. And previously, the recommendations of the FATF have helped a lot in improving the working situation in Uganda. And this is one of the very important platforms for also CSOs in Uganda. We use strategic litigation to challenge provisions that still have an overreach or are overbroad and susceptible to abuse, to make sure that we keep the sector open and functional, and the litigation has helped. Some of the emerging good practices is the inclusion of the CSOs in formal consultations and review processes, gradual movement towards risk-based approaches rather than blanket regulation, capacity building sessions that are jointly held by the regulators and the CSOs.
I switch to Bernadette. Can you bring us to Kenya and see how PIBORA navigates the world of the MPO regulation?
Thank you. My name is Bernadette from Public Benefits Organization Regulatory Authority, Kenya. Kenya has a very vibrant civil society organization. The sector is organization operating in Kenya, which is deemed to be public benefit organization. And we are in the process of coming up another different regime. You come to the Public Benefit Authority for them to bestow you a public benefit status, and then now the regulation will be more or less harmonized. Talking of that, the Act is very progressive, I will say. It gives an opportunity for the sector to form forums and a federation of forums. And then there's a National Public Benefit Organization Federation, which now it will form the code of governance, code of conduct within the sector, and ensure the sector actually is able to self-regulate itself, to be responsible and to be accountable, and there to be trusts and regulating the sector for AML CFT. And I think we'll appreciate the fact that we have to build capacity internally for us to be in a position now to monitor the sector for AML CFT, being able to detect, identify the elements of AML within the sector. And we've been doing the regular monitoring compliance, ensure that they submit their annual reports, their bank statement, they're giving us the sources of funds they have received and how they've spent the money in a particular year. And you will find the proportion of the non-profit organizations submitting the returns of the reports is actually below 50%. And the compliance level and things like that. And we have said, you'll find we are not well-resourced to make sure that you go to every part of the country and make sure that you look into them and see what they are doing. Also, we don't want to antagonize the civil society and tell them we are coming to police you. Remember, we want to have that kind of conversation. And as the compliance is here, you get to see the size of the sector. From the official reporting, it contributes roughly 0.8% of our GDP. It's sizable because it's at least 1% of our GDP in terms of the expenditure for the non-profit organization serving households. And that is a sizable one. And now moving forth, because we have seen the deficiencies in our regulatory and the different registration regimes, we have formed a multi-agency or multi-stakeholder group where there is a CSO represented, then there is a law enforcement representation, and the different registrar of a non-profit organization to have this conversation moving forth and see the best way we could develop a risk profiling matrix or matrices so as we can monitor them in a targeted way. Instead of monitoring everyone, we monitor those who are at high risk of the terrorism financing, misuse, or abuse. And then after we form the multi-agency working group, we'll be able to come up with a targeted awareness or outreach program to build capacity within themselves. And now with the regulations being out on self-regulation and even the bestowing of public benefit status, we will be able to address this from the forums the particular non-profit organization would have formed and the federation of forums, and make sure that at least we have proper representation and everybody has a good understanding of how actually tourism financing manifests itself. And the other thing to note, even what Uganda has said and our counterpart Zimbabwe, we have changed or amended the law. It was actually June this year, and we delisted non-profit organizations from reporting entities. We're only monitoring them and oversighting them. But the regulations are still yet to be drafted. I think we're in the final phases of developing the regulations to see how well we could monitor it and just have it very proportionate and very balanced. And the best weapon for us as a non-profit organization and the regulator is to make sure that we capacity build and raise awareness of how TF manifests itself, because you're not policing, we are oversighting, and such that every non-profit organization will actually be cognizant of how they could be misused for TF and how they can actually prevent being misused for TF. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. You helped us understand a lot better the dynamics of the Public Benefit Organization Authority. Let's shift to Nigeria. Mustafa, can you bring us to the world of the FIU in Nigeria?
Good afternoon. My name is Mustafa from the NFIU. I will share the Nigeria's experience with the MPO oversight. The approach and the shift in approach. In 2022, the Nigeria's money laundering law was amended to, initially it recognizes NPOs as DNFBPs, designated non-financial businesses and professions. However, in the revised law of 2022, it recognized the MPOs as a sector of their own. And that paved way in the approaches of how Nigeria approached the revised Recommendation 8. Now, another shift in approach is that not all MPOs face the same level of risk. We've compartmentalized the risk rating for MPOs to best suit the risk appetite or risk nature of the NPO with its level of risk. And this risk rating was from the national CFT assessment of the NPO sector. And now the focus the focus of the oversight is mainly on NPOs that have higher risk rating and that operate in at-risk areas where there seems to be a lot of terrorism activities. The framework for the leadership of the Nigeria's oversight of NPOs, the Special Control Unit for Money Laundering, the SCUMO, leads the oversight of at-risk NPOs in Nigeria. And it uses the NPO TF risk assessment for outreach and strategies as it guides. And the oversight is focused, proportionate, and evidence-based. The practical implementation of this oversight since 2023, a targeted outreach has trained hundreds of NPOs mainly in high-risk areas in the northeast and northwestern part of Nigeria. And the engagements help the NPOs understand the risks and improve the controls. The general aim is to support the NPOs understand their risks and mitigate them, and not to be punitive. We have witnessed strong collaboration with the INGOs Forum and the Nigerian network of NGOs. There are invitations, programs, and trainings organized on this angle, and the oversight has become joint rather than one-sided regulation. The policies and how it affects the civic space is the laws and policies are guided by research and open dialogue. And the preventive measures, we've prevented measures that could restrict the civic space and the operations of these NPOs. And also, we have demonstrated effectiveness in the oversight and civic freedom that we've demonstrated that oversight and civic freedom can coexist. And self-regulation is encouraged. We are promoting risk management tools and beneficiary verification, and we encourage NPOs to join the umbrella bodies for shared compliance support. And also the recognition for compliant NPOs to build trusts with banks and donors. And I will close that our model of the NPO oversight in Nigeria is more focused on partnership rather on partnership and prevention. And there are light but clear rules for all, focused oversight only for NPOs that are at high risk. And the other NPOs at medium and low risk have their own measures, which we'll explain in our conversation. And continuous outreach keeps the sector safe, active, and trusted. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. That was very, very clear and very practical. Come back on some issues later. Back to Uganda. And Stefan, we heard already about the changes and the new act and some of the changes that took place for the better, but also with some negative effects. Would be interesting to hear from you as the regulator. What is your vision on it, and what is the state of the art in Uganda? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, moderator. Thanks to Dr. Lazimana for the keynote. It's unfortunate that I speak after someone from Uganda has already spoken. Just to go straight to the issues and some of the areas of focus you want me to head into is that Bright indicated in the morning, and also Dr. Sarah has indicated that at the beginning of this year, the NPOs were removed off the list of accountable persons, and also it has been indicated that we are already in the process of updating the previous risk assessment to see whether the status quo is still the same or there are some changes So I think in terms of our experiences, some of the things that have happened so far, first was, of course, there is the general oversight that we have a duty to perform, but also there's that subsection that this whole thing is creating. So to address that, we started by establishing a unit, an AML CFT unit that focuses on that area, because you have a whole sector to oversee, but also now you have this subsection where you need to focus some energy. So we established this unit, we put their staff to focus on it. It has its own risk-based supervision framework. It has a plan, it has a manual that guides all its operations. Sarah has already indicated that we are also in the process of reviewing the law, because we need to incorporate this subsection within the law, because you don't want a situation where you are trying to give focus on a subsection, yet the law does not provide for it. So that process is already ongoing. Sarah indicated we conducted a regulatory impact assessment, and right now we're actually consulting. We are covering the entire country, consulting all the sub-regions. We are about to actually complete the process. By December, we shall have finished with all these, so that we can actually review the law and bring on board that subsection. So that's already ongoing. The other thing that has taken place is the training of the staff, because this is a whole new thing to not only our staff, but also to the stakeholders. So we are training our staff, but also we are trying to extend the training together with some activities with the Financial Intelligence Authority to train more stakeholders to bring them on board. Just as Nigeria and also Sarah had indicated, we're encouraging self-regulation, because self-regulation, just as Dr. Lazmana indicated, is also the way to go, so that a component of this address. Our only concern with self-regulation is that it's something that is voluntary, meaning that enforcement becomes a problem at some point. So I don't know how we shall actually address the enforcement component of this. The other bit that we are focusing on now is automation, because to improve the compliance and the risk levels when it comes to this, we are trying to ensure that we automate the systems so that it helps with the stakeholders complying with this. Yesterday morning, we saw Civic Advisory Hub has designed something that is greatly going to help the sector, and we already have indicated to them that we need to embrace such a system and work together on that. The other thing that we have strengthened is the interagency coordination and collaboration. We have the Financial Intelligence Authority, we have the law enforcement agencies. We are working together, because you cannot actually execute all this alone. So we just hope we can achieve all this. But of course, something which I have not heard from yesterday and even today, which I think everyone in this room should start focusing on, is the declining funding for the sector. I think to me that's a very big worry and should be a big elephant in this room, because if we are already dealing with a situation where we are trying to address recommendation 8, we are worried that the sector can be used as a conduit. How is the situation going to be in this arena when the funding is declining, the sector is becoming desperate and is ready to actually take on any money that comes their way? So for me, those are some of the things we need to address. What are we going to do about the declining funding opportunities? Globally, it's already happening. We are seeing the global trends. It started with COVID. After COVID, you saw the whole funding declined, but also globally with the wars and so many things happening, the environment is getting worse and worse. We may be talking about the civic space, but there's another bigger animal that's actually eating up the sector other than this. And this plays directly into issues of money laundering and terrorism financing, that the sector is going to become more vulnerable the more the funding declines. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Yeah, and thanks for bringing in the last point. Yeah, I don't know if it's even the elephant in the room, or maybe it might occupy the whole room, but reducing funding, of course, in terms of regulation. Thank you so much. I asked can I call you Peter or Dr. Lakshmana? Peter is good enough? To give your comments in the end, but it feels a bit awkward that everybody spoke. Maybe there's already something you would like to. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Allow me to say something on what Dr. Okello has just said. For us in Kenya, when it comes, the new act actually attempts to address the issue of declined or diminished funding in two ways. Number one, the act provides for, now we've got a room for CSOs and BBOs to engage in income generating activities on one condition, that all the gains accrued from such an activity will be plowed back to the main core activities of the BPOs or the CSO, so that it benefits the public. But also number two is what we do for BPOs or agencies which are registered under other regimes, that we bestow them with public benefit status for the purposes of tax exemption for targeted and specific programs which should be clearly indicated that they benefit specified, certain specified beneficiaries. By that, we will be able to cushion BBOs from the issue of diminished funding. Those are just some of the ways that we try to cushion BBOs. Thank you.
Thank you so much for adding that. I'm mindful of the time, so I want to give ample time to the floor, but there are two things I would like to address on the panel now. The first one is on the issue that you brought up, sir, on the securitization of the regulation, which is interesting that TEF regulation is different from regulating the sector broadly. It's different types of regulation, and we heard clearly from the FIU from Nigeria and also from Uganda that there are like two levels, at least two levels, right? You can shift on the basis of information and signals, intelligence information that you get to another level, which is the level of at risk, the high risk level, if I understood you well. And then another regime is enacted, another kind of monitoring regime, right? And I would also like to know from Zimbabwe and Kenya, do you have the same kind of mechanism? So what happens if it's not any longer the broad regulation of civil society, but we're really talking about suspicion of terrorism financing? It goes to another level. What kind of regime, what kind of mechanism do you know, both Zimbabwe and Kenya? Ernest, can I go to you first?
Thank you. So for Zimbabwe, like I said, we now have a new act, Amendment Act, which has been promulgated this year in April. What they are trying to, or what we are trying to achieve with that is to make sure that the regulation of NPOs is now centralized in terms of the NPO regulator. Previously, we used to have other different forms of registration. An organization can register as a trust. An organization was also able to register as a common law investor. So with the new act now, all organizations are supposed to be registered as a private voluntary organization. So there are transitional mechanisms in place, and currently as we speak, organizations are actually trying to comply in terms of, especially those pre-existing charitable organizations that has been operating not as private voluntary organizations but under other forms. But in terms of securitization now, especially with regards to TF measures that are being put in place, I think what we've been witnessing in the country is the fragmented approach, where, for instance, in various spaces where issues of AML CFT have been discussed, the law enforcement agencies have never been part of the process. And like I mentioned earlier on, that their understanding of the FAT of Recommendation 8 is also limited. So what we have been seeing was that in terms of the regulator, in terms of the NPO regulator, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and the NPOs, it has been very progressive, especially in bridging the knowledge gap around the Recommendation 8 and also around application of the risk-based approach. But if you look at ground now in terms of especially securitization, disruption of activities of NPOs that has been coming mainly from the law enforcement agencies. And these agencies have not been part of the conversations that we have been having through various platforms that have been created to discuss issues of the AML, CFT architecture in the country. So that has been the missing gap. So now in terms of what we are trying to do to resolve or to address that has been to involve the security, sector into the conversation and platform such that we also bring them to speed, especially around developments around FATF recommendation 8. One thing again, which is also probably a gap, is in country we do have a national task force on AML, CFT, and also proliferation financing. But there has been a hesitation from the government side of the regulators to include CSO representation there. I think it's also because of the securitization in terms of the discussions or even in terms of the measures that are being put in place. So you would find that the law enforcement agencies, when they then apply the recommendation or when they perform oversight over the operations of the sector, they mainly dwell much on what is being discussed at national task force level rather than what is being discussed with the sector. And one of the missing link again, especially in the previous FATF process, such as the mutual evaluations, the national risk assessment that has been conducted, has been the non-involvement of the sector itself. So you would find that various processes have been done, but I should also admit that on the part of the NPO sector as well, we have been ignorant. I think through the Financial Intelligence Unit, efforts have been made to try and reach out, but I think previously, before we started to participate in such processes like this, where we then begin to appreciate what is compelled of us in terms of the FATF recommendation 8 to be specific, we have been retracting in terms of participating in various processes, and I think we've been also vulnerable because of that. So some of the actions that we are now witnessing in country, they are implementing recommendations which were made in processes where we were never part of. So even for us to understand where it's coming from, and even, I feel like our participation in a process like mutual evaluation, national risk assessment, it provides an opportunity for us to self-represent, to also come up with it. Because I think mainly when we took off issues of inherent risk, especially on the mitigation side, it's only us as the NPO who are better placed to participate and bring forth the mechanisms that we are putting in place to try and make sure that we mitigate and we deal with the vulnerabilities that are there. So at the moment, I think there's a lot of moving pieces that we are trying to bring together, but at least there is now dialogue platforms where we are talking about it, and I think there has been some spirit of co-creation and consultation and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernest. Very clear. Bernadette, can I go to
The formative stages of institutionalizing the regulation of a CFT within the CSOs and also within the authority. As I had mentioned, you'll find non-profit organization and be registered by different registration regime. And consolidating them and making sure that you have a unified way to oversight the sector on TF has not actually happened from the regulator side. We usually carry out the regular compliance checks and things like that, but it has not been really to the non-profit sector in terms of tourism, CFT, countering financing of tourism. And when we completed the risk assessment, I think the initial steps of conducting the tourism financing risk assessment for the sector was actually the first step towards actually moving with the civil society, working together with the regulator, working with our FIU, that is the FRC, to ensure that everybody is brought on board. But the case that for Zimbabwe and ours looks like we will share notes and see how to get out of where we are and come close to Nigeria. Because where we are right now, we're in the process of identifying. The risk assessment has been done and we have the vulnerability and the risk factors, but we are in the process of now identifying the actual or the non-profit organization specific of at risk of tourism financing abuse. And after now we identify the organization specific, those who are at risk now will do the monitoring and oversight of the same. But we are in the formative stages, and the law was actually amended in June this year, so the regulations are not yet out in terms of monitoring or oversight the sector on TF issues. And the conversation is still skewed, where CSOs are not in the national task force. And actually, as we speak, we are being co-opted as a regulator to the national task force for AML CFT within the country. We are not members of it. So when you look at the non-profit organizations within Kenya, we have kind of taken a passive move towards it, and I think we just want to understand it and make sure that there's less disruption, as well as we are getting to understand how well to navigate and make sure there's less disruption and is common understanding and everybody is at the same level ground when it comes to CFT issues. But equally the same, the National Counterterrorism Center is very active in terms of prevention, whereby they have the civil society working on the de-radicalization programs and the sensitization and working with the communities near conflict zones. So you'll find it's two-pronged, the regulator and the multi-agency team within the security sector working with the specific non-profit organization near the conflict zone, working with the communities to ensure that there is a preventive measure in countering violence extremism. So we are there and we're trying to ensure by the end of the year, come next year, we will have proper regulations to oversight the sector for TF, as we have clear regulation to enable the sector to work as one in terms of compliance on other aspects other than the AML CFT. And the conversation we've started, we also started conversation with the Kenya Bankers Association, which is now the private sector, and then the civil society taking center stage and taking the lead. But as we speak currently, we are still not there yet, but plans are underway and you're committed, and we want to see this successful, and we want to say as Botswana is compliant in recommendation 8, Kenya will follow suit. I know Nigeria has already been there. So that is the situation we are in Kenya. We still have a lot to do, but with commitment, we will be there.
Thank you, Bernadette.
Be there.
Thank you, Bernadette. That's very clear. That's very clear. The other issue, self-regulation. Very important, and we see that FATF gives more credit to self-regulation in terms of its evaluations and follow-up recommendations. I think Peter, Stefan, you said it very clearly that you think it's voluntary, but at the same time, it can't be completely free, right? So you need to embed it in structure. So self-regulation needs to be credible, it needs to be audited, it needs to be institutionalized, it can't just be a floating initiative. So, and that is interesting. I think there are worldwide a lot of initiatives today about self-regulation of the sector, and if we see even in some of the countries where there are seals given by self-regulated authorities, that the banking sector now is taking as a kind of a comfort indicator and say, well, if you as a civil society organization are self-regulated and you have this seal because you were audited by that organization, we can open you a bank. That is very interesting. And then it's less voluntary, then it comes with, it's the stick and the carrot, right? It's a bit of both. And personally, I think there's a lot to win in terms of self-regulation, but the question always is, where does it start? Does it start at the side of the civil society themselves? They have their initiative, they have their standards, they have their ethics, or is it something that government can push or stimulate? I'm very interested to hear from you in the different countries what happened. Maybe Sarah and Stefan, you can elaborate a little bit more what is happening on self-regulation today in Uganda.
Yes, thank you, moderator. I think for Uganda, at one point there was a big push for self-regulation, And in 2016, we decided to incorporate it in the Act. But I can tell you that incorporating it in the Act still did not see members of the sector embrace it. We did not see the people come out and feel that this is something good for us. So the concern is that that voluntary nature of it, much as we even incorporated it in our Act, it did not yield the results we were really expecting, because there is still the majority. Actually, you see, the unfortunate thing is that the majority are the ones who are not embracing it. The few are there who can appreciate it, know that, yes, we need to self-regulate ourselves for the following benefits. But the majority decide to keep away from it. Yeah. And you see now, the next thing is that enforcement, as I indicated, also becomes a challenge. What happens when you see government, if there is non-compliance, you have some sanctions you can follow with. But what happens for a self-regulatory initiative that is no one should be coerced into? If the members are not complying, what are you going to do to them? Exactly. Yeah. So I think the whole self-regulation, we need to really rethink it in such a way that we need to have it marketed more so that people can see its benefits. And also we need to appreciate why people are not embracing it. So that if we understand the reason, maybe we can get solutions for why actually we could actually have more and more members on board. It's good that my colleague Sarah is here. She could give us the angle from the sector, why maybe it's not happening that way. Thank you.
I think she's ready for doing so.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I will speak to the why the self-regulation process is not being embraced. We have a burdensome regulatory framework, compliance to several agencies. Before we get to the NGO Bureau, you need to get to the District Resident Commissioner, you need to get to the Internal Security and Kampala Capital City Authority, you need to do work with the Uganda Revenue Authority, the National Social Security Agency, and the FIA now is off, so it was the 7th. So you find that there's duplication of work with the internal regulation with no reward in terms of, the burdensome procedure. So if there was consideration as NGOs seek to renew their permit or they are doing their annual report, if there was recognition that if you are under the self-regulation mechanism, then some of the processes could be waived. Then it would make sense to the sector to embrace. But as we speak now, the only advantage of the QAM, the internal self-regulatory process, is compliance within to keep a healthy, a clean book as an organization. Beyond that, there is no other advantage that the self-regulated NGOs have against those that are not self-regulated, and we do annual reporting, which is really burdensome in terms of time consuming and preparation. So the two processes need to meet each other somehow, right, and have a waiver that gives benefit for self-regulation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very clear. And definitely it should not be a double, right? If you do things by regulation and by self-regulation, it should be profit on one side, and there should be benefit, absolutely. Can I ask, I come to you, Mustafa. First, Kenya, I know that in the law, in the Public Benefit Act, is also mentioning of self-regulation and federations. Can you highlight, Bernadette or Peter, something about what you're working on now on self-regulation, and then I come to you. Take Sarah's.
Thank you. The Act is, as we had said, is very, very progressive, and it recognizes the role of the CSOs themselves taking lead in regulating and managing their affairs. So they are given options, and the regulations are underway, and I think my boss will speak to it, that non-profit organizations are allowed to form forums, like-minded small group, organized structure. And in those forums, there is also the provision of forming a federation of forums, whereby several forums come together to present a united front, having common purpose and common objectives and presenting a voice. And then from the forums and the federation of forums, then there's what we call public benefit organization federation. That is the national federation that comprises of different forums and different federation of forums. And what the Act envisions was the fact that non-profit organizations will be able to organize themselves, check each other, and have one voice on a national platform to present their views, and where their views could actually be heard and addressed. And you will agree with me, by the time the Act was being drafted, the conversation with the government and the civil society was not the way it is today. And then that was the issue. The public benefit organization or CSO wanted to have a forum where they can organize themselves in a way that will make impact, and when they are collective, like we're saying, the labor movement, more or less like the labor movement, because now it is membership and subscription, and you'll find the federation will actually fund itself, and it will be able to have a national outfit on the same. And I think Dr. can as well add onto that.
Yeah.
Just to add something that Benedict has forgotten is that the representative of the National Federation of BBOs sit on our board. That's number one. And that number two, once the regulations are out, and we are at a very advanced stage of validating our regulations, which of course we subjected to public participation across our country. And I'm glad the CSOs and BPOs are here, participated actively. Then, when they form the forums, they are supposed to come up with the code of conduct of all the BPOs, which they themselves will come up on how to self-regulate. Thank you.
Very good. Peter, you want to come in here? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think to also say something about the why is that from the angle of a regulator, what we also see is really frustrating self-regulation is the issue of trust. You see, we're all aware that the sector does not trust the government does not also trust the sector, but there's the third component where the sector does not trust itself. So if you introduce some initiative and drop it there, the level of trust will definitely raise a lot of suspicion within themselves, whether the self-regulation is going to be transparent, whether there's going to be no bias, and that's why from our angle we see that some people keep away from it because either they're not trusting how transparent it is. So it's important that they need to address that trust issue before they can actually embrace that entire self-regulation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Mustafa, Nigeria, self-regulation.
Yeah, thank you. The issue of self-regulation in Nigeria, it exists, but to a limited extent. The regulator in charge of the oversight of the MPOs, the Special Control Unit Against Money Laundering, works in collaboration with CSOs to adequately oversee and monitor MPOs that are at risk. MPOs can take up the outreach segment by ensuring that the understanding of their TF risks cut across sector and how to implement the preventive measures. To strengthen self-regulation, the regulators should promote simple, standardized risk management toolkits, link self-regulation with capacity building, help NPOs meet compliance without criminalizing them. And lastly, public recognition for the certified groups and the NPOs that are compliant, so that it builds trusts with the bank and international donors. So that's
Thank you, Mustafa. I would like to open the floor, and I know that there are already two persons that asked us in advance if they can come with an intervention. Eve Odette, are you there, and can you take the microphone? You're the first, please. I see her hand. Do you have the mics there, or you need some of the stage? Great.
Thank you very much. My name is Eve Odette from Kenya, and I really want to thank the panelists for those insights on how much progress is happening at country level, and also just the commitment across civil society in Africa on why this is important, why this conversation is important. A lot has been said, and I think there's general consensus, if you agree with me, that there's need for government to work very closely with civil society in oversight and to reduce risk. I think that's a given. We agree, I believe. Now, and the why is also very clear, because civil society fill in the gap between communities and the market and the state. And they play that role critically, but much more, they have the roots and networks to reach where governments cannot reach. And for that very reason, I see civil society as being very, very useful in building the right tools for risk assessment, because they have the nodes in the communities. And for that reason, I think there's a very big reason and case for civil society to play very closely with the regulators in terms of forestalling risks. On the other hand, we understand why governments are very critical in terms of securing the very space that civil society needs to work on. The civic space is protected from risk by government. We must bear that in mind, but much more so, we must make sure that we are protecting the already vulnerable civic space and civic funding space. The second thing, I sort of overheard this in a conversation during lunch, so I'll make that disclaimer, but it's something that's also very fundamental, is about the sustainability of these great initiatives, the initiatives you're hearing in this room. I have worked a lot on this policy space across Africa. And I know there are very many policy advocates in this room. And we know that the policy agenda has moved forward because of civic engagement and the close working relationships between governments and civil society. And there's a lot to borrow from that space. And so as we move and forge forward, we need to embrace those best practices. Regulators need to embrace and bring on board civil society for sustainability and for ownership and for the evidence that we are talking about. But the risk that still remains, and what I overheard over lunch, thanks to the Uganda team that I was sitting next to, I was eavesdropping, I'm sorry, was the fact, the element of, the transitions. When we work with governments, of course, it's policymakers behind those desks, and they transit. And so how do we make these institutionalized? How do we make these processes institutionalized? So that is still a hurdle to pick. There's training going on, there's capacity building, there's knowledge and information sharing, but how will we sustain those and make them improve the scale of these efforts? On the other hand, lastly, for the civil society, how do we ensure, we've just been talking about self-regulation and self-governance, etc. How do we move beyond the platforms to organizational culture so that, again, when there's transition, these become part and parcel of the system? So that when an organization sits in a platform, a forum, and the CEO exits, there's still that understanding that this is the way we organize ourselves, that this is an agenda that is part and parcel of our culture. So thank you very much and I'm personally very, very encouraged that there's a lot going on, but we must pull together our efforts to make sure that these efforts remain sustainable and grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eve, and also for your last doing things differently and acting differently. So that's correct, and there it should start and there it should end. Victoria, we also made the deal that you were not in the panel but on the floor, but we give you the word because it's very interesting to have your opinion from Nigeria on CIFT.
Thank you, Foucault. I think I've really enjoyed the conversations, and Mustafa has really shared the perspectives from Nigeria. The country has made progress, quite an enormous amount of progress. I say that because of efforts towards sustaining it, not necessarily just introducing reforms, but efforts towards sustaining the reforms. And in the morning when I was talking, I also talked about what I call the listening approach. So the listening approach, to unpack it, simply means being able to make contributions to processes or AML CFT arrangement that we feel have serious shortcomings. And when you communicate those shortcomings being received constructively, I think that is something that really triggered some of the curves, that Nigeria has had. Another thing I would like to flag is the self-regulatory component. So self-regulation, most times when we speak to governments, they tend to mix it with NGOs belonging to either a coalition or belonging to an umbrella body. So I think the assumption for all NPOs to be under one umbrella body for many jurisdictions is not even practicable because of so many reasons, so many reasons. Sometimes it could be tribal, it could be relations within the country that make that sort of unification impossible. And what usually would happen is that it is not good practice, in my view, to force cooperation or force those collaborations, but instead allow like-minded entities to form their groupings. But there is something that the panelist from Kenya said, which is what she called a clean book approach, and which links towards voluntary compliance. And I think that is the best practice, encouraging NGOs to adopt transparent and accountable practices as a way of life, as a way of a going concern within the institution, rather than forced collaborations. And I will give an example of what I mean by polarization. For instance, in Nigeria, we have such religious divisions whereby in some parts of the country, it might be okay for, when we talk about gender justice or gender equality, it might mean a girl may have the right to marry before the age of 18. There might be another part of the country is a total aberration. If you force those groups to be under the same umbrella, they just quarrel because they are not united by the same religious ideologies and beliefs that sustain those types of practices. So allowing them to work separately is not a division. It is also a way of understanding that these differences exist, but how do you ensure that no matter your differences, there are certain ground rules that NPOs must subscribe to, and they subscribe to those rules regardless of whatever issues or causes they're advancing. So that is just that important part. I think the last thing I might want to mention, the importance of research, data. I think that is what helped the Nigerian process. The first ever analysis of the NRA that was ever done in the African continent, when we did that for Nigeria and shared it with the authorities. At first, before the collaboration became healthy as it is today, then there was a lot of pushback, both from state actors, how dare an NGO criticize a national security document and, that sort of thing. But somehow within the high ranks of the security architecture, somebody would say, let's bring them into the room. Let's even listen to what these shortcomings are complaining. is all about. And that conversation triggered some of the reforms, the major reforms that Nigeria has happened today. And we're very grateful to Nigeria for allowing those those things that we thought as criticisms today, how they have also led the foundation for regulatory reform, healthy reform for that matter. So let me stop here.
Thank you, Victoria. And let me retake your issue. Very helpful that self-regulation is not always being member of an umbrella or a platform. And 2 points, don't unify that too much. There's a diversity in the sector through all kinds of lines, ethnic, thematic, funding, etc., geographic. We should respect that. You cannot unify self-regulation in just one organization. And the other is that I think donors, banks, governments could promote also standards that civil society can adhere to that are sometimes developed by civil society themselves, like accountancy standards. There are quality standards like ISO, which don't imply membership of a coalition, but it's a standard of behavior, of governance, and they create your organization in a better and sound way. So that's sort of always good to do, and then you can make it a bonus. If you have that standard, you can have less burden on the other side, bit of the point that Sarah made before. Thank you so much. Let's go further to, I see hands in the back. Is the microphone moving the right way? Anne, is that you? I see you standing. Please.
No. Oh, is that one? Is that on? Yeah.
It works.
Oh, hi, I'm Anne. I'm representing South Africa, the NPO sector. We're going through quite a few changes at the moment. I'm listening to everybody. We're all on the same journey. Thank goodness. We can console each other as we go along. But one of the big things I'm looking at now is how independent are the regulators from government? This is a big question because we've experienced a problem in South Africa of political interference in the NPO directorate. And we're now recommending that we become an independent regulator. Now, there is a little bit of wiggle room in law where we can remain part of government, but independent of a ministry. So my question to you, there's actually a loaded question, but you don't have to answer all of it, is how are your units structured and how are they financed? And also the same would apply for the self-regulatory bodies. How do they finance the work that they do without being compromised? And the third thing, do any of you charge a fee for registration? Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. We will later ask the panelists to come back on the point. Gentleman in the back. Obviously. Please.
Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Very well.
My name is Oyebisi Oluseyi, and I work with the Nigeria Network of NGOs. And I am putting emphasis on the Nigeria Network of NGOs to support the thinking that within the freedom of association interpretation, you necessarily cannot legitimize a network for all civil society organizations to come under. That's a box ticked. The other bit is to note that civil society regulation itself can be tricky. And this is where we need that trust. And I must commend, I'm not sure whether it's a regulator or a civil society actor, for saying that while we do not have trust within and across sectors, it is the basis for any regulation that must happen, whether statutory or self-regulation. The history of self-regulation itself was around 2003, when One World Trust came up with self-regulation as a model or a response to the transparency and accountability conversation that was happening at that time. Then from the 2012 self-regulation became a response for us to respond to crazy regulations or the shrinking of civic space. Now we've gotten into an era where we can start discussing self-regulation and statutory regulation, but the challenge remains the divisions that polarize civil society. Because what we're trying to self-regulate are areas where statutory regulation cannot cover. For instance, if anybody comes to give me money at this time, how do I vet that type of money? It's not in any statutory regulation, but then the ethics around the work that we do, which could lead to the challenges that we see. For instance, funding cuts. Now I'm under pressure to look for money to pay salaries. How do I ensure that I am guided ethically not to look for the wrong type of money? That is where self-regulation comes in. And there's enforcement. We should not stereotype self-regulation, because there are models that have worked for organizations where they peer pressure each other, report to each other on an annual basis, and use that as a way of either sieving each other out or retaining that relationship as to how they move. So there has to be that balance. You cannot enforce self-regulation, it is voluntary. But in enforcing it, technically, it has to be within the zone of those that have agreed to say this will be our behavior, either through a code of conduct or through just signing a document that says this is how we would behave as an organization. And I think we have to get that clearly.
Thank you. Thank you, Abese, for that very important point, the code of conduct, the behavior, the ethical. Anyone else? A lady in the back? Are you? Oh, you have the microphone. Is there anybody else that want to bring examples here in front? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the panelists for the expose on, particularly on self-regulation. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I think my colleague in the panel mentioned that Zimbabwe has a PVOA Act which has been amended as at 1st of April 2025. I think one of the exercises that we have tried as civic society, as NPOs, as FPOs in Zimbabwe is to promote self-regulation. So we did a number of exercises since early 2000s. And I think the approach that we're pushing for, I don't know what the lessons from other countries are. We're pushing to have a self-regulation where we have NANGO as our as the body or as the forum under which all NPOs congregate. But obviously one of the challenges is that the membership, not all NPOs, regardless of how they are formed. Obviously, some are formed as in terms of humanitarian support, providing humanitarian support. Others are CPOs, others are CSOs, others are faith-based organizations. But not all of them are members of NANGO. So therefore, it makes self-regulation rather difficult and impossible. However, maybe a question that I will probably ask: what will be your reflections if, for instance, in our context, have NANGO as a statutory body? So it will mean that NANGO is a quasi body that regulates NGOs. I'm not so sure if there is any jurisdiction where that model has been used. So maybe I just want to hear reflections on that proposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to close the floor now, go back to the panel and give everybody briefly to reflect on the different questions from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, and some of the other arguments, and anything you might have to add. So I'll start with you, Ernest, again, and then we close with you, Dr. Laxmana.
Thank you very much. And I think quite a number of submissions were more of comments, which all of them I think I concur. And I can relate like what my colleague has also alluded to in terms of the approach to self-regulations. And I think issue of enforcement mechanism has been discussed earlier on. Issues of financing, I think there is a question again from the panel around how it's financed. Those are some of the difficult questions that even back home we were trying to grapple, to say, how are we going to maneuver this? So I would also want to hear from other panelists around that. There was a question around whether there are registration fees. So just to share, to say, for us with the new amendment that I alluded to, there is now a requirement that all NPOs that are registering as private voluntary organizations, they are supposed to pay a fee. And I think the problem that has been there around the fees, it's already gazetted where for local NGOs, you are supposed to pay $150 US, and for international NGOs, you are supposed to pay $250 US. But for national, I think the argument has been around how do we treat community grassroots-based organizations that are relatively small in terms of size and even in terms of their annual income. So those are some of the difficult questions that we are going through at the moment. But also just to echo comment around the issue of research, I think so far from the platform that we have opened around engagement, one of the things that we have learned is around how do we present evidence to the regulators in terms of, for example, how do we prove that for sure the sector is being over-regulated. So those are some of the things that I think I just wanted to echo what the panelists and the floor has raised in terms of issues to do with engagement and also self-regulation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. General reflections also on what came out of the plenary. The situation of shrinking funding base should be addressed seriously because it will expose NPOs to risky sources of funding, and these risky sources might also take advantage of the absence of funding sources to get into the charity sector to advance their agenda. It needs to be addressed by the actors. Moving beyond platforms to the implementation, I think in our respective countries and other fora, we need to mainstream these conversations. We need to carry them forward. We need to have, for the countries that don't have dialogue platforms with the regulators, these platforms need to be established, but also where they exist, they need to be strengthened. Like I said, in Uganda, we usually ask the question of implementation of recommendations. And I think that's the area we need to strengthen more with the regulators on our case. The question of, compliance, clean book, I think it cannot be overemphasized, even for our own credibility with our partners, even away from the regulator. If you are not credible, then there's no way people can risk, handling funding with you. Funds are very sensitive, and we need to strengthen this so that even with our partners, there is credibility, but also with the regulator and beneficiaries of our work, there should be credibility. I thank you very much.
So, thank you very much. And I think the one thing we have to agree, all of us, is self-regulation was a topical discussion in 2003, and then 2012 was the unintended consequences of shrinking the civic space. And you find you will not make it legitimate for self-regulation to work. But if we are common in purpose and you want to say, we want to have self-regulation working for us to matters AML CFT, to be in a position to safeguard the sector from TF abuse. If we agree on that and then we form like terms grouping and see how well we can safeguard ourselves from being abused or misused for TF purposes, I think it will work. And we're excited for us in Kenya because it hasn't worked before, and we're thinking it's an opportunity for like-minded people to form a forum and have a conversation and push it forth. And the forums voluntary, they will form federation of forums, and eventually we will have a national federation of PBOs which will bring agenda conversation like this, bringing all the non-profit organizations in one room, sharing conversations across board. I think to some extent, if we look at it without the box, we don't want to think outside the box, we want to think without the box and see what benefit does self-regulation bring and what are the advantage of having self-regulation in the fights in terrorism financing. Because in a nutshell, if we all understand how terrorism financing manifests itself, the risks will definitely be low. There'll be less likely the odds of us being misused for terrorism financing will be low. So I think it's a conversation we can take forth and take what works for us. And the fact that Uganda, they say there's a lack of trust between government and the CSO, and then there's a lack of trust the other way, and equally there's lack of trust between CSOs. So how do we navigate these conversations? And we are facing a reality that definitely the funding, the foreign funding flowing to us in Africa is shrinking, and that is a reality. And as somebody once said, the resources you need are always within where you are. So I think equally we need to sit together and come up with strategic ways of saying, how do we share experiences? If you have done a research on this, we don't have a repository where, and there's a conversation of citizen-generated data. Where is the data? Where are we sharing resources? Are people going to collect data from the same community? Somebody else has collected data, and some evidences are there, but we are not documenting them. So we need to think in ways that we can actually minimize on the costs and see how we can benefit each other on the things that we have done and the research that we have done. And I think the issue that we were asked if your government owned, yes, we are 100% government owned, with employee drawing funds from the taxpayers and facilitating our running of the organization. And yes, we charge some fees for running our operation, for registration, and your registration is usually perpetually. When we give you the registration certificate, we don't revoke it at any given time. So the fee that is paid is one-off, and for the PBO array, we usually do not have an annual renewal fee, but there is an annual renewal fee for the community-based organization, which is registered under different regimes. And you want to make it so progressive, at one point in time, we just have one register, one national register that caters for all public benefit organizations.
Hello. For Nigeria, the Special Control Unit Against Money Laundering is also 100% government-owned, and it has examiners, who are the supervisors responsible for the oversight of at-risk MPOs within the organization, and also the SCOMOL is funded by government, However, in Nigeria, there is no registration fee in our case. So that's it. My colleague from the FIU wants to add more on that.
From the floor. Well, do it now. Joy, please, very briefly. Sorry, Stefan. Is there a microphone for Joy? Okay, there is one in the
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. So in addition to what my colleague is saying concerning the registration...
Go a bit closer to the mic, Joy.
Concerning the registration of SCUMO in Nigeria, in fact, we have over 135 plus agencies that are registered with SCUMO, right? And we've made it so flexible that you can do it on your own without going to the SCUMO office. Everything is online. Even you seated right now, you can Google the SCUMO website, you do your registration and you do all that. They made it so flexible and it's easy. Then when it comes to the regulation, they do everything. Then maybe some of the organizations that have to do with the SEC, they collaborate, they have a platform, everything is online. So you don't have to go to SCUMO office before you can get registration or get even the trainings, your certificate, everything is online. We've gone digital in Nigeria, so we have really gone ahead. Just in case of some of the country people that say they want to come to Nigeria. So you should make it fast. Nigeria is actually moving ahead. Thank you.
Thanks you. Great to hear that. Stephen.
Yes, thank you. I just have two areas. One is to also try and respond to some of the questions, I think mainly to the regulators. The regulators independent from government? The answer is no, because these are government establishments. And in terms of financing, it's government that finances them. How are self-regulatory bodies financed? This should be, and since these are initiatives that are created by the sector, then the presumption is that their membership and subscriptions, I think they are sources of funds. Do we charge fees for registration? Yes, we do. And the last one was from Zimbabwe. Can NANGO become a self-regulatory body? The answer is no, because you are an umbrella body, meaning your focus is advocacy and lobbying for the sector. And if you wanted a self-regulatory body, I think you should bring it together. Like, let me give you the example of Uganda. We have the NGO forum like NANGO, but to come up with a self-regulatory body, they had to bring other members, other umbrella bodies. They came together and formed a self-regulatory body that Sarah had indicated, that is called the Quality Assurance Mechanism, that has been giving them that platform. So I think those are some of the questions that were asked. In terms of my parting shots, I think Dr. Lazmana was very clear that we need to focus on protecting the sector without compromising the enabling environment. I think that's the clear message to all of us here. But also, my strong push is that we need to have more proactive measures on the floor and not reactive ones, because reactive ones will always wait for the damage to first be done. But two very key issues that are coming up here is that we need to address the issue of trust through all the kinds of multi-sectoral dialogue platforms. We need to address that, not only between government and the sector, but also the sector internally. Can they start to sit and have conversations and address the whole mistrust that is also lying within there? But also, the other thing is the declining funding that is clearly a very big elephant coming up. We need to start paying attention to it. So overall, I really want to thank the organizers for this opportunity, and thanks a lot, moderator. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Dr. Laxmana.
Thank you. Yeah. First of all, I'll just shoot straight our structure. We are a SAGA. SAGA is semi-autonomous government agency. So that's our structure. We are government. We are established by an act of parliament. So we are government as the regulator. That should just be straight as far as that. Do we charge fees? Yes, we do. And we get a good, after automation, our revenues are increasing to finance ourselves. But majorly at the moment, we still get funding from our government. Does that impede our oversight to the authorities, to the BPO sector? Absolutely not. So just to give my closing remarks, and thank you for the panelists who've actually dissected my keynote address. What I think is that the fact that government is present here as the regulator is a testament that we have given an olive branch to the CSO that we need to work together. And I think the CSOs and the BBOs should be able to embrace the same and actually work on trust issues, because PBOs and CSOs, I think they double speak, and I'll just want to throw the spanner in the works there, that as much as you demand accountability and transparency from government, you don't want to be questioned. You should be able to do that so that we work together. If we work together then, and we realize that this conversation, it's not about you and us. We are together. Once a country is grey listed, it affects everybody. It affects the civil society groups. It affects us as government. So, and the fact that NPOs are touted to be conduits, then that gives us something to work on, to say we need to work together. In some instances, some countries, you go into a forum like this and people from the same country, from government and from the sector are strangers. I'm glad some of us, when we came here from government side, the NPOs who are here, we work together. We've already have a platform. And that's why I'd want to laud the Civic Advisory Hub for that program of talk to your regulator. Talking to your regulator means you engage positively for the betterment of your country. I think if we put our synergies together, then this sector will thrive, and there shall be no suspicion between the sector and government. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Regulation is a big issue, that's clear. I was very happy with this panel and also with the input from the audience that we could make it tangible. We can see the struggle, but we see also the progress we are making. And we see the dilemmas we are in, but luckily there's a lot of research done in these days, and there's a lot of conversation about it, and this is not the final one. I'm very sorry that we have taken more of your time, but I'm convinced it was more than worth it. Big kudos for the great panel. Big applause for them from ourselves and the floor. Big applause for you as well, and I'm not sure who's going to give the final words or will release us from the room, but I think we're almost there. So thanks again, and see you tomorrow. Thank you. That was really good. That was really good. Thank you very much. You want to come?
Doing a group picture. Thank you. Thank you.
It was nice. Thank you so much. Yeah, we need a photo. Please. Yes, you're right. Yes.
That was nice.
Thank you once again to our panelists for that pragmatic and engaging panel discussion. I take it that we have all learned a lot. We have come to the end of day 2 of our conference. Just a few announcements. Firstly, we shall be having a group photo tomorrow. We will be here in this very place tomorrow. So come ready with your best suit, your best dress, so that you can feature in that group photo. And then secondly, just a soft reminder, you are kindly encouraged to keep time tomorrow so that we can start and finish on time. May we rise up on our feet? Another expression to learn, re a leboga, meaning thank you. Say that. Thank you so much. Have yourselves a lovely evening. My name is Kutlo Mudise. It's been a pleasure hosting you with my co-host, Mr. Saragano Mereki. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.